I guess this play began when I was invited to travel from Australia, where I live, to Cork. And I spent 10 days in Cork chatting with Graffiti and talking about what I might like to write for the company. And so there were lots of ideas that started to emerge fairly early on, which included a kind of interest in the mythology of fairies and the fairies of Ireland, I guess. So I started to kind of do a little bit of research into changeling myths. And changelings are fairy children who were swapped with human children. And from my reading, I was learning that this was apparently to mix the blood and keep the balance between the fairy world and the human world. So I became really interested in this idea of two worlds, and I knew I wanted to incorporate that into the play. The other inspirations for the play were the stories of gangland wars that were happening between families in Ireland, and that was something I was really familiar with because the same kind of thing was happening in Australia. So there were a couple of different criminal families that were fighting each other over money and drugs and territory. So I wanted to incorporate that idea into the play as well. Yeah. As an Australian playwright, I knew that I was writing for an Irish audience, and I don't think that had a particular impact on the way that I wrote, but I was aware that Irish writing is particularly well known for its rich language, its poetry, and so I wanted to attempt to write something that was in rhyme. And Where in the World is Frank Sparrow is kind of written in a kind of what I would call organic rhyme. So it's not precise rhyme, but the rhymes are there, and sometimes the actors work with the rhyme and sometimes they work against it. But I think the world of A Shadow City, which is the setting where the play takes place, could be really anywhere in the world. There are some references to some wildlife, hares and goats and rats, but I think those animals could absolutely occupy any kind of landscape. So, you know, potentially this play could work in Australia or Africa. So I think it's kind of has a kind of global supernatural feel to it. I started writing when I was fairly young, so when I was a teenager, around about 14, 15, and I just became really fascinated with the plays of Shakespeare, and I started to write quite furiously, little poems and plays. And I think the key to learning how to write is actually just writing as much as possible, and not throwing out anything, so keeping all of the material that you generate. I also think it's really important that you go to see as much live performance as you possibly can, and also that you kind of create work and put it on with your friends so that you actually see how your writing is working on the floor, because it's important to remember that when you're writing for theatre, it's really collaborative, and so you're writing for actors and for a director to direct the play. So the other thing I would recommend that young writers do is that they read as much as possible, read other people's plays and other people's writing for inspiration. I do a lot of research when I'm preparing to write a play, and so I would spend maybe 2 or 3 months actually reading literature and books related to the subject. So for Frank Sparrow, for example, I read a lot about changeling myths, I read up on the history of Cork, I read about climate change, all sorts of topics that informed the writing of the play, so that it felt like it had a real world connection, even though it's kind of quite a supernatural narrative.